From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
I am Michele Chisholm, President of the Library of Congress Chapter of Blacks in Government. The Library of Congress Chapter of BIG, along with the Daniel A.P. Murray African American Cultural Association, are pleased to host you for the first of a series of a year-long programming we have partnered to present with other LC employee organizations and service units to observe the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We have partnered with service units such as the Office of Inclusiveness and Compliance, the Law Library to display items from their expansive collections, manuscripts, and American folk life. We hope that others will join us in this effort. We greet you and welcome you. We hope that something you hear today will enrich your life. Please stand and receive the Forestville Military Academy Drill Team for the presentation of colors and LC Chorale's John St. Amour singing God Bless America.
While the storm clouds gather, where'er it be, let us swear allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
The next voice you hear will be of Louis Clavell, our legislative advisor and acting vice president of Blacks in Government.
Thank you. Honorable Congresswoman staff, Librarian of Congress, distinguished members of the United States military, ROTC, Library of Congress staff, colleagues, friends, brothers and sisters, I'm Luis Clavell. I'm a member of the Black History Month Committee, and I am talking today to you about the occasion of this Black History Month. We are approaching Black History Month in a very refreshing way, in that we are presenting events that should create some conversation between all of us. This event, the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, is designed with all of the other events in mind. We mark 50 years since the passage of the most comprehensive civil rights legislation in our nation's history. 50 years means it's time for us to take a look at it, for us to not only celebrate, but to evaluate it, and to think about what it took for us to have an act which made racial discrimination in public places illegal, and establish a standard to thwart rigged voting systems in the South. It also required employers to provide equal employment opportunity no matter what a person's color or sex. Now, it's very interesting to be a part of the Daniel A.P. Murray Association. This historical African-American association honors a man who did not have these protections. He worked early in the 20th century as the second African-American here at the Library of Congress. He worked diligently to support Congress in their research. He was also a part of W.E.B. Du Bois's movement of Pan-Africanism and created the research necessary for the fundamentals of the Africana Encyclopedia. We understand that he didn't enjoy all of the protections that we are granted today. And in thinking and remembering the impact of this law, the law gives strength to ordinary people so they might do extraordinary things to change the way the nation works, to change the way that industry works, to change the way that our economy even works. This act could not have been achieved without the tireless efforts of our great civil rights leaders, as well as our political leaders. We are in a situation where the military has been the testing ground for all civil rights. The integration of the military for people of color and for women has been the place where we see these rights implemented. So we've designed a program that we've invited not only the Honorable Congresswoman, but also Clarence Tiger Davis, who is a Vietnam veteran and the leader of many of our organizations that support vets of color. Without a doubt, substantial progress towards equality has been made as a result of the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. But there is substantial work to be done. When we do an accurate accounting of where we are because of this 50-year situation, we have to look at it in a way that, what do we need to do to improve it? How can we extend these rights to create greater equality? And what is our now responsibility to some of the statistics of unequal education, high unemployment, high incarceration rates, and will we allow this to be the new Jim Crow? This is our charge. In order to sustain the legacy of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we have to represent what it stands for. It stands for our country's highest ideals of equality and opportunity for all citizens. July the 2nd marks the date of the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The events between now and then should inform you that you are a participant with this act, that the ideas that were left to us 50 years ago have to be recommitted to. We have to redouble our commitment and not only think about a celebration, but a responsibility that we have now. Every citizen who fought for civil rights 50 years ago deserves your effort. We have not reached the promised land, but it's up to us to ensure that America reaches its full measure of promise. The passage of the Civil Rights Act was possible because of the persistent nonviolent efforts of countless heroes. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and John F. Kennedy inspired our generations. All Americans are indebted to these patriots for their courage and success. We honor them on this occasion as part of this program of remembrance. 50 years from now, I'd like to have our children and our grandchildren look back on us and say we had the courage and the wisdom, the strength to take responsibility, and we pledged to build a future together. Thank you. I'd like to just take a couple of moments to talk about something within our collections that can support your research and knowledge about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We've recently launched congress.gov, which will replace thomas.gov within 2014. If you would like to find out more things about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it's an excellent resource. It's something that the data sets support Congress and the American people. I encourage you to think about this, to think about how far we've come, to think about the act and who it has served, and to really find ourselves in a participatory type of democracy that has really moved this country forward. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Larry Sarratt, the president of Daniel A.P. Murray African American Historical Association.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Larry R. Sarratt, president of the Daniel A.P. Murray African American Cultural Association of the Library of Congress. It is indeed a great pleasure, a privilege, and an honor for me to introduce our Librarian of Congress. James H. Billington was sworn in as the Librarian of Congress on September 14, 1987. He is the 13th person to hold this position since the library was established in 1800. Dr. Billington hails from the state of Pennsylvania. He is a Princeton University graduate. He earned his doctorate from Oxford University, where he was a Rhodes Scholar. He taught history at the Harvard University and Princeton University. Before coming to the Library of Congress, Dr. Billington was director of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Here at the library, Dr. Billington has championed the Library of Congress National Digital Library Program. Dr. Billington created the library's National Private Sector Advisory and Support Group, the James Madison Council. Its members have supported major exhibitions at the library, as well as important new acquisitions for the library's collections. Dr. Billington has received many accolades throughout the country. More than 40 honorary doctorates. Dr. Billington was presented with the Presidential Citizen Medal by President Bush in 2008. It is an award bestowed by the President of the United States. It is the second highest civilian award in the United States, second only to the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Dr. Billington was awarded the Order of Friendship by the President of Russia Federation, the highest state order for a foreign citizen may receive. Dr. Billington is an author, historian. Dr. Billington is married to the lovely Margie Ann Billington. They have 4 wonderful children and 12 grandchildren. He is none other than our librarian, Dr. James H. Billington.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction. I should say that I know we're waiting for our distinguished Congresswoman to come, but let me say a couple of things historically, because the nature and the celebration of a distinctive African-American culture and history and record that going back really to almost to the very beginnings, in fact, to the very beginnings of our new nation, has a really extraordinary history that was largely gathered in by Daniel A.P. Murray, who's president kindly of the society here in the library. But he was appointed in 1867, if I remember correctly, and he proceeded until nearly to his death in 1926 as a great accumulator of this historical record. It was his vision from the very beginning that this record should be gathered in at the Library of Congress. He was the first African American to work, and there were only 11 employees at the time he was hired. So it was and he consistently worked, and in fact, the first celebration, really, of a distinct African American culture that was both faithful to the enormous and complex and fascinating history of the accumulation, development of that culture, and at the same time an enlargement of the America's understanding of itself, was to a very large degree the work of Murray. The first public unveiling of a distinct African American culture occurred not in America at that time, but in Paris at the Paris World's Fair of 1900. Du Bois was the spokesman, but the person who prepared the bibliography for him and indeed for the whole future of African American studies was Daniel A.P. Murray. He did it quietly. He included all kinds of things, including posters for runaway slaves. John Hope Franklin, whom I once had the privilege of succeeding as chief executive of the Fulbright program, who was a man who, by the way, really saved the Fulbright program at a crucial point in the 1960s, said that the great thing about what Murray did was to look at things you wouldn't normally think of. For instance, the posters for runaway slaves who were put in post offices in the North had very elaborate descriptions of these. You say, you know, we'll give you a $500 reward, which is an astronomical award if you can recapture so-and-so. What that really was unconsciously an endorsement of the marvelous and only partially used qualities of so many African Americans in that difficult period that followed the initial liberation and of slaves. Now we've had 7 exhibits of African American history here at the library during the nearly 26 years that I've been at the helm, and it began with the exhibit for the founder of African American History Month, namely Carter G. Woodson. Now, incidentally, one of those 7 exhibits was the only exhibit was ever in the history of the Library of Congress that used all 3 buildings, because we designed to show not only the struggle for civil rights, which is being celebrated once again with a distinct exhibit this year, but was also showed the amazing achievements in all kinds of fields that were achieved even in the periods of the greatest difficulty for the advancement of African Americans more generally. So this is a very rich thing. And Carter Woodson, that exhibit of the Carter Woodson collection was, first of all, told us a lot about that man, whose papers we have here. And the fact that Dorothy Porter, the curator of the Moreland Spingarn collection at Howard, really the great builder of it, the great research collection on the African diaspora that included Caribbean and other areas outside the United States, and was in fact the first chartered by the Congress to be more than just an American exhibit, but an exhibit that included other countries as well in the northern Western Hemisphere. So that was basically the research support collection for the Moreland Spingarn was set up on the duplicates that Daniel A.P. Murray had accumulated in this very long period of building what has now become 11 million items of African American history. It's the most comprehensive in the world, and when President Ford announced in 1976 to expand the celebration to the month of February, he instructed Americans to, and I'm quoting him, seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. So I won't go into all the illumination of the collections that we have, but it adds up to about 11 million items, most particularly what is the only still actively in use as well as historically recording major American collection. We have the collection of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, as well as the National Urban League, Legal Defense Fund, Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, as well as many of the activists, Thurgood Marshall, Roy Wilkins, Daniel Murray himself, Kenneth Clark, Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, Joseph Rao, Herbert Hill, and you go on, Jackie Robinson, Ralph Ellison, James Foreman, so many others. This is a very, very rich resource for this part of America's memory, all of America's memory, but the distinctive contributions of our African American citizens. Anyhow, they're all available for use. Now, on June 19th of this year, we'll open the Civil Rights Act of 1964, A Long Struggle for Freedom. That's the exhibit's name, and it will commemorate the 50th anniversary, which Lewis has very appropriately signaled out as an important thing. Important thing for all America, for our memory, and for noting the enormous progress as well as the still unfulfilled parts of the hopes and aspirations of this great tradition. Anyhow, the exhibit will include about 200 key items, correspondence and documents from civil rights leaders and organizations, images captured by photojournalists and professional photographers, newspapers, drawings, posters, in-depth profiles of key figures in the long process of attaining civil rights. We'll provide educational programs to schools around the country about this landmark. It's already well represented on our, among the more than, well, really, I guess, about 30 million items that we have online for broader educational purposes. Now I am programmed to introduce, I don't know, this is Clarence Tiger Davis, extraordinary patriot in our nation and a man of whom I know you're all going to want to hear from, but I'm not sure if he's arrived as yet.
Yes, sir.
Oh.
Yes, sir.
Keep it short.
You didn't introduce yourself. He's got so many accomplishments. Okay. Then I can go ahead and summarize them with confidence. But I was asking about, and he told about other things. So this is a man of many accomplishments. All right. First of all, he served in the United States Air Force. He was a professor of history at Morgan State. He went to Morgan State originally. He's got all kinds of achievements. He's been an advocate for veterans, all veterans really, although he also founded the African American Patriots Consortium, which established African American Patriots Day, which is celebrated on the last Saturday in February of each year. So that's another memory day that is coming up. Anyhow, from November 1982 until his retirement in December 2006, he served in the House of Delegates of the Maryland General Assembly, and he held several leadership positions in that long and distinguished career there. He's married to the former Barbara Teresa Holder, and they have, since Lewis enumerated my children and grandchildren, for him, he goes us one better. He and his wife have 4 children, 9 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. This is a man of many accomplishments, a great American patriot, and a very productive man in all the things he's done. Ladies and gentlemen, Tiger.
Well, that was one of the best introductions I've ever had. I didn't realize that some of those things were accomplishments, you know what I mean? I was just having fun. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed my pleasure to be here. I haven't been here since I worked on my master's thesis, you know, NAACP versus the Amos and Andy show. Now, before I get wound up here, Joe Wynn is our national liaison person for the National Association for Black. Stand up, Joe. You got all the right colors on, brother. And then I have another one of my associates here. And stand up a minute, George. Now, let me tell you who George is first. George founded, he's going to correct me if I get it wrong, he founded an organization called the African American Firefighters Historical Society. Got it? Okay. And what he does, he conducts research on the volunteer fire organizations that existed in Maryland and the surrounding areas. And it's a very interesting topic, and I've always enjoyed his presentation. He has a ceremony once a year where he honors those firefighters of days gone by. Because in those days, if I'm correct, you know, many white volunteer firefighters did not serve the African American community. Well, wait a minute, this is my speech now. This is my, hey, ho, ho, ho. I knew I had to put him in check sooner or later now, you know. But George is a wonderful person. Go ahead, George. All firefighters throughout the country. Okay, I'm sorry I narrowed your scope, you know what I mean? but I knew you would get me straight now, all right? Okay, you know, and other folks like Corinne Simon, who works with us in the Black Veterans Movement. You know, history, it depends upon whose eyes you're viewing history. And so consequently, if you live in America, or if you live in England, because you know when the British were in India, I'm sure they looked at India one way and called it the British period, but if you were Nehru locked up in jail fighting for freedoms, you saw it totally different. And so it is here in America. And so one of the things we say about history in our Black Veterans Movement is that the missing pages of American history is African American history. The missing pages of African American history is the history of blacks in defense of this nation. Okay, and I mean from day one, I mean we got this mountain up here called Negro Mountain. Nobody never asked why it's called Negro Mountain. Well, that's one of the early heroes before the Revolutionary War. And then we move forward and we look at history of the Revolutionary War. Very seldom are these gentlemen ever spoken of. And all of these people that we're going to mention today fought for civil human rights, and they fought to be citizens of these United States of America, and wherein they could enjoy the rights and privileges of citizens. But you and I know that they were always denied. But that is one of the hidden histories in this country, the service of African Americans in defense of the nation. You all love the movie Glory. You jumped head over heels when Spike Lee did his thing on the 92nd. And then you were off the chart with the Tuskegee Airmen, huh? But then there's a bigger history than that. Who's from Philadelphia in here, or Pennsylvania? Okay, and y'all admit it too. That's no problem, admit it. You're from Now, if I were to ask, who is James Forten? Would you know? This is what I'm talking about. Most people in this country would not know because that history has been hidden and ignored for so long. James Forten, at the age of 14, in 1776, joined the Navy to fight for the rebels. And maybe I shouldn't call them rebels, but that's what the British called them, right? But they were rebelling against the authority, which was the British. He was captured and taken to a POW camp. He was so young, and the captain observed him shooting marbles with his kid, and he saw the intelligence in this young fella, and he said, look, want you to go back home to England with my son, and I want you to go to school there. James Forten said, I am a patriot, and I will endure whatever my comrades endure. Now, this is a little teenager here. Now, first thing you do when you go into basic training, they have you quoting Nathan Hale. I regret that I have but one life to give for my country, right? Well, here's someone early on, and no more than 15 years of age, refuses freedom so that he could stay with his patriot. But now look, what happened to James Forten? After the war, he did travel to England on his own, but then he came back and became an apprentice sailmaker. And ultimately, in 1798, he bought the company, and he then used his talents, his extraordinary skills and knowledge of sailmaking, and he brought forth new inventions or what have you, and the business just took off. He became one of the wealthiest men in the nation. He was the biggest philanthropist in Philadelphia in his time and may be the greatest philanthropist ever. He not only financed anti-slavery movement or the abolitionist movement, but he financed all kinds of civic improvements or what have you, okay? And if you're from Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, I would think that would be part of your history, but it's not. But James Fortin Jr., the family has an interesting history. I won't talk to you about James Fortin Jr., the son, because he became a black nationalist. Now, I know you all have no idea what black nationalism was between 1820 and 1850. But then that is your shortcoming if you didn't go to Morgan State College or one of the historically black colleges or university. I can't help you there, okay? But we did study history at our schools, and we didn't study Western civilization, we studied world history. And that was a major difference between the historically black colleges and universities and many of your majority institutions. Okay, so we did dig a little deep, but that was James Fortin. Okay, now, all of them became freedom fighters. If you look at Prince Hall, who was a soldier during the Revolutionary War, wherever you go, you got Prince Hall Masons. Not only did these soldiers serve valiantly and honorably in defending the nation, they founded organizations that carry on traditions even today. And everyone probably has some knowledge of Prince Hall Masons. And then if we move forward, we take a look at a gentleman by the name of William C. Nell, and that begins to bring home the issue. He says that there are those who will ask, why make a parade of the military service of colored Americans? The combination of circumstances which have veiled from the public eye a narration of those military services, which are generally conceded as a passport to honorable and lasting notice of Americans. We were denied that. Historically, and even today, we're denied that kind of recognition. But African-American soldiers have always stood on the front line, not only for this nation, but also for their people. And this is why you should know about their service to their people. I mean, it's replete with stories of riots, rebellions, or what have you. One of the biggest was the Camp Logan incident in Houston, Texas in 1917. How many of you know about Camp Logan? Okay, well, hey, good, good. We're going to talk to the rest of them about it. In 1916, the Buffalo Soldiers Unit, 9th and 10th Cavalry, 24th Infantry Regiment, were sent to Mexico. They had chased Pancho Villa back across the border, and they stabilized the border with Mexico because, Pancho Villa would come over and raid and steal, do whatever he wanted to, and then head back across the border. Well, the 24th Infantry Regiment, which stabilized the border, were eventually reassigned from Columbus, New Mexico, to Camp Logan, I should say to Houston, to build Camp Logan. All they wanted was to go to Europe to fight for freedom and democracy. That's what they wanted. But no, they were signed to Camp Logan. When they got there, the black folk in town was real proud. They were walking around, strutting, just feeling good because these great American soldiers are black. The local townspeople began to get upset, and they said that these so-and-so's were insolent and becoming more insolent. So whenever the black soldiers went into Houston, they were treated rudely by the local police and other establishments. And then on one occasion, one of the black MPs, well, before I get to that incident, let me tell you what they endured. The white contractors who came on the post would urinate and spit in their water and food. And you know how it is, those of you who had to come through that door, you know you have a little protocol you must go through before you come in. The white contractors would ignore the black soldiers' request for identification because we're in, you know, it's wartime. World War I is raging in Europe. And they just totally disrespected these black soldiers. They even put feces in their food. And whenever the black soldiers complained to their white officers, the white officer said, well, look, we have to be careful of local custom, but we will take care of this. As always, we would take care of this. On one occasion, an MP was in town, and he observed this brutal police officer who had brutalized many black soldiers who were heroes coming in from Columbus, New Mexico. And the MP interceded. The cops pounced on him and beat him till his face looked like the inside of a watermelon. Word got back to Camp Logan that one of the soldiers had been killed. And so they went to get their weapon. The white officer says, oh, wait a minute. We'll take care of this. This is not the way to handle this. And they disarmed the captain, and they went and got their pieces, and they locked and loaded. And the mob that was coming to teach them a lesson was met en route. In the ensuing battle, and the count may vary, there were approximately 19 whites killed, 5 of whom were police officers. 5 blacks died, one of whom committed suicide. The sergeant committed suicide. Now, what happened afterwards? They convened a court-martial, and almost without any preparation or what have you by the defense or what have you, they tried and convicted these soldiers of the 24th Infantry, which you will refer to as Buffalo Soldiers. And, excuse me, and they didn't even give them a chance to write home or to send their goods or home. They were practically, and you know, I'm exaggerating this a little bit, but the way when you look back, they was practically marched to the gallows. And all they asked for was to face a firing squad, because to hang someone, somehow there was no honor in being hung. But they wanted to die like soldiers. Give us a firing squad. That's all they demanded. And they stood up like men and took whatever punishment came. But they stood up for their community. Now, during this same time period, or I should say before that time period, you will see what they call the, what's that little town on the coast there, but Austin, a lot of these little towns, there were always that problem because black soldiers stood up for their rights, but they don't want you to know about that. But it's incumbent upon you to check your own history. I get sick and tired of hearing black folks going to white folks talking about black history. Well, you get it yourself. It is not other people's responsibility to embellish your history. They have their own history, whether it be Irish, Italian, or whatever. Let them do that. But you should do your own. And so that's one of the messages that I bring to you today. But understand that it was the military service of black people that led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Remember this, history depends upon whose eyes you're looking at the world through. They've practically written A. Philip Randolph and Paul Robeson out of history, but these are 2 of the greatest men that have ever lived in this country, bar none. In 1941, A. Philip Randolph, knowing that the war was coming, threatened a march on Washington if FDR did not take action to end discrimination and provide equal opportunity for blacks in the defense industry or any other industry that was funded by the federal government. FDR said, well, you know, that's private enterprise. And of course, Eleanor found out about it, and she had to spank him when he went back to his quarters, right? Because Eleanor was a real warrior herself. So the threat persisted. FDR then issued Executive Order 8802. 8802 will effectively, it didn't end it, but it took a step toward ending it, the discrimination in the defense industry, the auto industry, and this is how you get the Tuskegee Airmen. This is how you get the first black Marines, the Montford Point Marines. Executive Order 8802. And then I think it was 8803 where they applied the same opportunity for females. Because, you know, women have always been subjugated too in this great land. And sometimes when my wife starts running her mouth, I wonder why we can't go back to the old days, right? Well, you know, I have to throw that in, you know, but look, we've been together since we was 15, and I'm 71 now, so you know I'm accustomed to whatever she does, right? And thank God for her. But at any rate, that's 1941. So once again, we see the role of war and the need for black soldiers. Now, after that, A. Philip Randolph establishes what he calls the Committee to End Jim Crow in the military because they're playing on the war. It's a timely thing because the nation can't have this disunity during this particular time. And at the same time, while he was pushing his committee to end Jim Crow in the armed services, Walter White, the president of NAACP in 1944, was saying the Negro people, like all other Americans, recognize the war as the chief issue confronting our country. We demand of any political party desiring the support of Negroes a vigorous prosecution of the war. We are opposed to any negotiated peace as advocated by the Hitler-like forces within our country. Victory must crush Hitlerism both at home as well as abroad. And he went on and on. I won't give you the entire statement, but some of our leadership played on that. Now, okay, the Congresswoman is here, so I'm going to wrap this thing up. All right. But, and I'm going to wrap it up with Truman's Executive Order 9981, which effectively began the process of dismantling segregation and discrimination in the armed forces. Now, this took place in 1948. Lieutenant General Beckton here will tell you, he's a DC, he will tell you that when he stood in the commander's call at Aberdeen Proving Ground, the commander there says, well, as long as I am commander of the post, there will be a colored swimming pool, and there will be a white swimming pool. There will be a colored dining hall, and there will be a white dining hall. These politicians, they come and go. The military is an institution, and we'll be here forever. Okay? Now, that's the way it went down. Nothing happens. 1950, the Korean War breaks out. The U.S. caught unprepared. The first thing they do is take the 24th out of Japan, shoot them over there. Okay? Then it became too cumbersome to assign people by race because, well, what race is he? What unit? You know, hey, they started assigning them by professions or MOS. That's how you get integration in the military. And it worked. It worked. The war is over in July 1953. Less than a year later, May 17th, 1954, you get Brown versus Board of Education. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't get Brown versus Board of Education without the extraordinary service of black soldiers in Korea, which packed on top of the extraordinary services of African Americans in defense of the nation during World War II, and I mean extraordinary. All of those units we have talked about, of you've seen in TV, none of them can match the 761st Tank Battalion or the 183rd Engineering Battalion. And one of the reasons they don't talk about them is they was part of Patton's army. They were the lifeline of Patton's army. And when you see the 101st bogged down at Bastogne, or at what some folks refer to as the Battle of the Bulge, remember who liberated this elite unit. That was the 761st Tank Battalion that liberated that elite unit. The 761st Tank Battalion was sent out. Patton did not believe that blacks were capable of operating tanks and warfare. He sent them out on frivolous missions, and he sent them out on other missions where he knew they would fail. They ended up liberating 50 towns. They stayed in combat longer than any other unit without a break. We have an extraordinary military history because we've always believed in the promise of America. We didn't want it today, but we knew if we fought, eventually it would come. But there's much more you need to know. But I would not dare take up any more time with Congresswoman Donna Edwards. She may not let me back in the state of Maryland, okay? And I do love my home. May God bless each and every one of you.
Good afternoon. And Congresswoman Edwards, I'm glad that you're coming behind Mr. Davis. If you would, it's my pleasure to, before bringing her to the microphone, to just share with you about this wonderful woman who represents the 4th Congressional District of Maryland, Congresswoman Donna F. Edwards. She serves Prince George's County and Anne Arundel counties, and she was sworn in after a special election to become a member of the U.S. House of Representatives in the 110th Congress. In doing so, she became the first African-American woman to represent Maryland in the United States Congress. I think that alone deserves a round of applause. Before seeking elected office, Ms. Edwards enjoyed a diverse career as a nonprofit public interest advocate and in the private sector on NASA's Space Lab project. In 1994, as co-founder and executive director of the National Network to End Domestic Violence, she led the effort to pass the Violence Against Women Act that was signed into law by President Clinton. Since being sworn in, she has secured a number of legislative accomplishments to improve the lives of working families in her congressional district, to expand research and development, domestic manufacturing, and infrastructure spending to create jobs and grow our economy. She is also the first member of the House to introduce and champion a constitutional amendment to overturn the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision. This part I love. A native North Carolinian, Congresswoman Edwards was one of 6 children born into a military family that traveled throughout the country during her childhood. Perhaps this is what propelled her as a trailblazer, as she was one of only 6 African-American women in her class at Wake Forest University, where she completed her undergraduate studies. She received her Juris Doctor from the University of New Hampshire School of Law, formerly the Franklin Pierce Law Center, and she's a proud mother of 1 son. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Congresswoman Donna Edwards.
Pardon my voice, I have a little bit of laryngitis, and so I'm going to try to speak close to the microphone. I cannot believe I am following Professor Davis. I feel like I should still be in the classroom because I learned a lot even just sitting here for a few minutes. It's always good to be here at the Library of Congress, at our library, at the People's Library. And Dr. Billington, thank you very much, and to all of the staff and the team here at the library. I was actually just thinking that a long time ago, when I didn't have a ton of money and couldn't really go anyplace, I would actually bring my son into town and we would sit in the reading rooms here at the library. And my son's coming over to visit me in my office in a few minutes, and you know, as a mom, you got to take advantage of those opportunities. with our adult children. Whenever I am in the halls of the library, it always brings back just really, really, really good memories for me and for us, and the times that we spent just looking through the volumes in the text and, touching all of the texts here in the Congress and in the library and looking in the old library, and which I think is architecturally one of the most beautiful facilities that we actually have here in the District of Columbia. And so I think that you're also, benefited by being able to work here in these halls. I understand why they call you Tiger. I do. And I was thinking as I was listening to Professor Davis and thinking back on the history of my family. My father actually served in the United States Air Force for about 30 years. And he was in the first year of that integrated service of the Air Force on a plane as a teenager headed to Korea. And so as I think about, how things have transpired over the years and the important contributions that, frankly, African Americans have made in all of our history, in all of our wars in service to this great nation, sometimes under-recognized and underappreciated, but I'm glad that we're gathered here today. And to all of our veterans who served this great nation, I just think we owe such a debt of gratitude. And part of what I learned from my dad, and our older service members were not always so good at telling the story and the history of their service. He had to kind of draw it out of them. I know that is true in our household. They just served. It is why I've really valued the project that the Library of Congress has to reach to our war veterans and to tell their stories. In our district, we participated in that project, and it was one of the best things that we have ever done. And when I think about the stories of the veterans who told their stories, and they're now recorded for posterity here at the Library of Congress, and when I talked to some of your team members, Dr. Billington, they said to me that it was important for us to try to gather some stories of African Americans who had served in wartime, and we set about doing that in the 4th Congressional District of Maryland. And I remember, talking to and hearing the story of Colonel Brewington, who actually lives out in Maryland. His daughter's in our congressional district. He's a World War II veteran. And so he's, we're losing our World War II veterans. And he told the history and the story of his service. And we were all just brought to tears by the fact that, one, he continues to speak about it, but how proud he continues to feel about the service to this nation. And I think about my grandfather, who served rather, unrecognized in the Navy and in the Army in World War II, at a time when nobody even really thought about African Americans serving in our Army and our Navy in World War II, but they did. And he used to tell us with stories. He'd gather all the grandchildren around and tell us the stories of his service as well, tell us about when he was in Europe and the destruction in Europe. And my dad, when my dad joined the service, because it was at the beginning of, real integration of the armed services, I remember him talking to me one time when I was a really little girl about when he joined and he had to go down to some Air Force base down in Mississippi, and he had to take the train to Mississippi. And at the time he took the train, he wasn't allowed to sit in a train as an integrated train because the trains were segregated. And he remembers a train being stopped in some dark, lonely place in the middle of nowhere. And he told me that at the time that some local law enforcement came onto the train and they were checking everybody's IDs, and they pulled him out of the train. And he was wearing the uniform of the United States Air Force, and they pulled him out of the train in the dead of night. And these particular law enforcement officers, it's hard to call them that now, threatened him on the side of the train in the middle of nowhere. and he was scared for his life. And you know, he was a youngster. And I think about my son. My son's 25 now, and I still think he's a baby. And at that time, my father was a grown man, and he was frightened for his life, and he tried to do everything that he could, not to make a false move, not to do anything that would jeopardize his life. And then finally, they let him back on the train, and he remembered, you know, arriving at the air base in Mississippi, and he said he felt like he was in protected territory. And for us as a family, because my father grew up in West Philadelphia, not in a really, really great place. My mother grew up on a farm in Caswell County, North Carolina. I was born in Yanceyville, North Carolina, because, you know, moms used to go home to have their children when I was born. And, you know, they came from humble means, but they grew up with a lot of humility and trust that they could build a better life for themselves and their children, even that their parents had built for them. And my dad always believed in service to the nation, and we grew up in a household where there was an incredible commitment to the great United States, even at a time when the United States wasn't fulfilling its commitment to many of our African American families. But they instilled that in us, and we believed in it. My father used to tell us that we could do anything that we wanted in the world, anything. No barriers set. And so I didn't know that, you know, when I applied to the Air Force Academy when I was a teenager, and I was actually accepted in the first class of women into the Air Force Academy. I ended up not going, but I was accepted into that class. I didn't know that we weren't supposed to do stuff like that. And when my dad asked me when I was about when I was in seventh grade, about 11, 12 years old, he said to me, "Donna, I want you to sit down." He always had these legal pads, you know, what is with these legal pads? He had a legal pad for everything. And he said, "I want you to write down what you want to be in life. What are your goals? What do you want to be?" And so I wrote on that piece of paper. I was about 11, 12, between my 11th and 12th year. I can't totally remember. But I wrote down, one day I want to be a lawyer, and one day I want to be in politics. He said, "Take that and just keep it for yourself and just remind yourself." And I took that piece of paper. I remember tearing it off the pad. I didn't want the whole legal pad. And I remember tearing it off the pad, and I put it in a little jewelry box that my dad had given me, a little ballerina in it. And, you know, you open it up, and the ballerina twirled and played a nice little tune. And I put it in that jewelry box. And I long since not discarded the jewelry box, but it was in some box of storage or whatever. And I ran for Congress many, many, many years later. Ran for Congress. In the first election, I lost. But that second election, I won very handily. And I pulled out that jewelry box, and I opened it, and it was right there in there, that piece of paper that my dad asked me to write. Now, my dad is long since gone, and it was many years and a lot of stuff in between, you know, 7th grade and when I was 50. But it was an important reminder to me of the importance of remembering our stories, remembering our history, and believing in ourselves, and having somebody there who encourages you to believe in yourself. And I think for all of the little African American boys and girls and Latina girls all throughout my congressional district, and I go around and I talk to so many of them, and they just need somebody to believe in them. And they need to understand their history. And they need to understand that there have been so many tremendous sacrifices for them in all of these intervening years that we describe as the civil rights movement, as though a movement stops and starts. It doesn't. It goes on. We have an obligation to redefine civil rights for our generation. They are not the same fights that we had in the past. They may be similar. They may require different strategies. We may have to create different kinds of opportunities. And one of the wonderful things, and I look at, this audience as you're gathered, and I see the wonderful diversity that is represented in our great nation. And sometimes I think we hear the loudest voices, but we don't often hear the proudest voices. And the proudest voices are all of those of us who get up and go to work every day and take care of ourselves and our children and do the right thing and help somebody else, and recognizes that none of us really gets here on our own. And, I'm just the granddaughter of, we used to call her Mary Jenny, my grandmother, in Caswell County, North Carolina, who had 7 children. She was the, daughter of another farmer who had 7 children. And, I think back to that time, and I wonder what she would think now. She was born actually January 1st, 1900, the very turn of the century. And I don't know if she would know that her granddaughter would be the first African-American woman to serve in Congress from Maryland, or, the 33rd woman. Thank you. 33rd woman to serve in the Congress even since 50 years ago of the Civil Rights Act. 113 African-American members of Congress. But I mean, surely it must have been a dream of hers that the next generation and the generation after that would do better than her generation. And that is what we wish for all of our children. And now as I close, I'll just share with you, my son is an amazing young man. I didn't think he was listening to any of the stuff that I was telling him when he was growing. I didn't think, his long legs were stretched out and he was slouched in a chair, and sometimes his eyes were closed. And I thought for sure he didn't hear a word that I said. And it turns out that he actually did hear all those words that I, said, that he really did take it in, and that he embraced it as part of who he is, and that he carries not the weight, but the heft of all of the generations that have preceded him. And he never knew his grandfather, my dad. My dad died when Jared was just 6 months old. And my dad would say to me, because we knew that he was dying, he would say to me that he just wanted to live long enough to hold his grandson. And he did. And I show Jared that picture sometimes. And I talk to him about my dad, because I was very close to my dad. And I share with him the stories that my dad shared with me, the stories that my mom shares with me. But those are his stories too. And I think often we can look at all of the heroes that we identify, the people who are in the history books and stuff. But you know what? Not a one of us has to look any farther than our families to find heroes and to tell those stories to our children. And so anyway, that was just on my mind today. And so I just thank you very much for inviting me and for being able to celebrate our history together, and to remember that, we can come together in February, but our history is for celebration every single day of the year, every single month of the year. And we are proud to celebrate that. And I'm proud to serve in the United States House of Representatives and to look out on the steps of the Capitol. Dr. Billington, when I was growing up and my dad was stationed at Andrews, you could climb up and down the steps of the Capitol. We did it every Sunday. We would run up and down with my dad on the steps of the Capitol. We were allowed to do that. And we would picnic on the west front of the Capitol up underneath one of those big trees. And my dad would always be in his uniform because he always had to go back over to the base. And my mother would prepare lunch, and the little toddlers and infants, those siblings that I have that are much younger, they would be with her on a blanket. But my dad and I and my sister, who's just under me, would actually roll it. We'd be in our Sunday dresses, and we used to roll down the hill on the west front of the Capitol. And when I came to serve here, and I looked out at that Capitol, I thought, who would have thought that the granddaughter of Mary Jenny and Major Frank, and the daughter of Mary and John Edwards, would be serving in the United States House of Representatives. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Darren Jones. I am the program director of the Murray Association and also a life member of Blacks in Government and a former African-American intern of Dr. Billington's, as are some people in this audience like Lavonda, Kevin, Antoinette, and some other people. We want to present a few gifts, so I come bearing a few gifts. First, for the Congresswoman, for her outreach to the African American community and all she does for the African American community in Congress. We have for her the Emancipation Proclamation. And for Professor Davis, we're going to present him with the same thing. Professor Davis. And for Lucy, who's in a position at the Library of Congress, which all of us aspire for. Lucy, we have a great gift for you, kind of coming out of its case.
Oh
but
my, thank you so
there you
much.
are.
Thank you so much.
And then finally for Dr. Billington, who does so much for everybody at the Library of Congress. I'm the sports reference specialist in the Humanities and Social Sciences Division. I know he's a great sports fan. What we have given him is a baseball with the names of the signers of the Declaration of Independence.
On that note, can the church say amen? Amen.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.